and thank you so much for joining for this episode of the Enneagram and Marriage Pod. We are talking about nines with every type today, and we are on a new series. So we can go through all the types, starting with nine this time, and really walk ourselves through the basic structures of the type, as well as to invite you to walk through what each type is like in relationship with each of the other types. So by the time we get done with the series, guys, we're going to be having 45 different pairings discussed, but don't worry, we're going to pace ourselves. This is a shorter episode today, so we're just going to be doing the nines today, and we will come visit the other types with a few episodes in between as well to make sure we are well saturated for all kinds of life's issues. But so happy to have you with us for this series today, particularly because this nine series was so popular in the past because we have had so many nine listeners and friends here. And I think there's a lot of nines out there. Quite honestly, I've already engaged with 3 9 clients as well as a couple of nine friends today. So I can tell you that we are a very big group here of nines. There's a large collective voice for learning what to do with a nine. And I have a very small part of me that's a nine. If you are a tri-type person who likes tri-type theory, I am a 7 4 9. So I really like peace. They bring that out in my couples work, but I definitely am not a nine first. And for many of you listeners, or for those of you who are watching, or your spouse perhaps tuning in for you, you are a nine. This is your main type. And so we want to honor that and remind everybody that even if you do have, like me, pieces of other types, you often typically do have a main type. And knowing about that can be so good for your marriage. And it is such an advantage in couples work to know this about my clients, because then I know what their triggers are and I can help support them in different ways. Like, for instance, today I knew a nine needed to have a hard conversation with their partner, but I also knew that it would probably be good to do that one together. So when I give that assignment, I say, hey, you know what? If it's easier to have that conversation with me present or helping to coach you guys along, feel free to do that one with me together. And so there are all kinds of tools like that that I'll just drop with you today. But I also want you to know my book, The Enneagram in Marriage, Your Guide to Thriving Together in Your Unique Pairing, actually has a mini treatment plan for every single pairing out there. And it is in depth, where I walk you through the beginning, middle, hard stages of marriage, and even through to the other side, so that you can feel like, okay, we've crossed the path from honeymoon probably into some sorrow, but then we have moved fluidly into health too. And we also, more importantly, know the roadmap to get back there if we lose our way again. So that is in my book for you in the show notes. But here and now, let's talk together about the nine. So many of you know the nine as the peacemaker. Another great term for the nine is the diplomat. And I will head right into the work of the nine when I say that nines aren't usually diplomatic unless they are in their healthy space. Because when a nine is not exactly in their healthy space, often they're just making peace or being peace or holding peace. And what we love instead is for nines to bring all of their gifts, can't do it all at once, but in different moments, that they do wake up to more of the widespread gift of the nine, which does include diplomacy, bringing justice, bringing clarity. A lot of presidents and world leaders have been nines because there is this gifted sense of rhetoric with depth, but also diplomacy and a spirit of love and meekness over it. So talk about beautiful humility, but also paired with power. Now you have a fuller picture of the nine peacemaker. So in your marriage, when you're healthy, you're actually really powerful and bringing a great deal of your voice to action. And when you're perhaps not as healthy, or maybe even just tired, a lot of nines experience a lot of tiredness and fatigue. Often you instead bring sloth and you just forget yourself, and you're not remembering your importance in your family and in your community. Often your voice is so peaceful that, ironically, although the world needs it so much, it often sleeps to that peace. And so your partner, your family may not always get to benefit from your voice, because they may tune you out when they're just like, oh, that's a peaceful person in our family. They're good. And that's even a classic statement of nines is, I'm good. It's fine. It doesn't matter. And so it's so helpful for you to be able to have a few tips to wake up. And so I just want to remind you that you do get 2 to 3 hours a day, I hope, of still being able to rest. Everyone deserves that. That's sort of the Goldilocks zone of success anyway. So I never want to take that from our nines. But other other than those 2 to 3 hours a day, try to allow yourself to be stretched, to be in action, to deliver on that diplomacy so that you are getting your voice out there, that voice that so beautifully knows how to merge with your partner and others, but not just merge, also identify with clarity what your own thought is after viewing the world and seeing what it entails. So, for instance, if your partner says, I would really like to go skiing, but you know how much they love it, and you've just merged with them and you realize, oh my gosh, we've been saving our money. This would be such a fun trip because they love it so much. You could be all in that whole story and then not even really pause to consider that you hate skiing. And I just think that that's making me smile because I remember when my husband had his nine wing and it was like that one time. And I'm like, whoa, hold on, you don't even like skiing? And so that is just a small example. It could be something food wise, it could be something that you guys are doing bigger, like having children or vocation. And it's so important to allow yourself some space and time to discern what you actually want and like. And that requires for you to use these tools of, like I said, awakening. So a lot of nines ask, how do we awaken? I don't know what to do. And usually, what we say to anyone who's in this body or gut type triad, which means just a group of three, eights, nines, and ones, but here we're talking about nines, we remind you that awakening to your body is a great place to start. So, doing some bottom up processing, like deep breaths, like time to get your cardio output, like yoga, like anything that you feel like in this season of life would be really good for you versus just slothful, like, oh, I'm going to sleep extra, I'm going to have extra snacks and comfort. And it doesn't mean, like I said, you can't enjoy that a little bit each day too, but to allow yourself the fullness of really loving yourself and others well, it looks instead like you being able to say, I am willing to put some energy out and wake myself up, knowing that when I am more alert and in my power, I have a lot to share because I've been listening. I am a peacemaker and I've been watching the world and I do have a lot of love to give and I care so deeply. So, this is a great stance for you. Also, you're good, speaking of stances, at looking to the past to see, wow, where we've come from and what we can glean from what we've already learned culturally or maritally or as parents or partners, wherever you're at in your relationship, to be able to say, I see the past, I'm able to see where we're at now. I can look ahead a bit with some vision to what's coming. And I can do this with a practical nature. If you're with a nine, know this too, that there's a lot of practicality to them. And that's something I think of a lot of the P's with nines. I'm like, practicality. I think of them with their peacefulness. I think of them with their positivity because they don't like to have conflict. And if they do, they try to keep it as light and positive as possible. But sometimes we need to do our work. And so this is where it's so important for you to be able to say, okay, I am going to bring up the conflicts. I am going to bring some passion in. I am going to bring some logic in as well. I am going to, like I said, look present in future. And I'm also going to walk with you in a moment through all the types with a nine as a partner. Or you might say, oh, I'm going to listen in because I have a sister who's this type, or my kid is seemingly this type. So we'll walk through all that too in just a moment. But just to give you that reminder of the biggest piece for nines waking up, it's of course going to involve doing their physical work, some emotional work each day, and some spiritual work as well. So just allowing yourself to release to God, allowing yourself that space to say, how am I taking care of me emotionally? What do I really want to need? You might need to give yourself a few options or ask your spouse, can you narrow it down to a few options for me? But also that last one of being so critical. It's the first and the last of just remembering when you start getting in that fitness, even if it's just a really brisk walk, you will start to wake up to your body again and your own needs. And you are not going to forget the needs of others in that space either. But you can forget your own needs and the needs of others if you're just laid back in a place of sloth. So I want to discourage you from staying in peace all the time, welcome you to wake up to your right action. And to get there, we already said, try to really work on spiritual, emotional, and physical self care each day. So you are worth it. Now, let's talk about nines with each of the types briefly as well, so that wherever you're at with these types, maybe one of them's even your spouse, you can truly allow yourself to learn a bit. And again, as I said, make sure you go to the Enneagram and Marriage, Your Guide to Thriving Together in Your Unique Pairing if you want more in my book. So, nines and ones together, it's a very common pairing. And I really enjoyed talking about this way back 400 episodes ago in, if you can believe it, season one. But I'm deeper diving here. We're spiraling through to remind you that with a one and a nine, you have two people who very much care deeply about justice, not just one caring about right and one caring about peace, but both of them caring very much about justice and feeling that they are in the right. So diplomacy becomes incredibly important for this pairing to be able to say, we each have an opinion and we're going to learn to merge together, to each of us move in about halfway. It doesn't always have to be exact. That will be key. And this pairing can ask each other, wait a second, how important is this to you, etc. And if it's a really important issue to either of you, I do recommend you put the relationship before that, right? Because this can be a pairing that's really idealistic. And also, thankfully, some practicality can be in there too. So, with your practicality, make sure you check in to say, how important is this one for you? And start to gauge things a little differently there. And I think otherwise, there's a lot of great balance with you guys both hardworking and relaxing, and you bring that to each other. So, that's a really cool part of your pairing. Now, nines and twos together, oh my gosh, such a fun pairing. This pairing doesn't come in as often for work. When they do come in, it's because they've had a lot of fun and they are trying to learn how to share the load because there's a lot of fun having together and happening together, but there's also a need for we have to divide up the work. And oftentimes, whoever is in that female role will take on a bit more of the workload because that's just the cultural overlay, even against such caring types, whoever's the two, who's ever the nine. So make sure you're looking at that cultural overlay too to say, hang on a second, is this one of those situations? And I just had a couple this week where that wasn't, by the way, and they said, we don't fit that rubric, so don't wear it if it doesn't fit. But if it does, allow yourselves to come into seeing if one of you is perhaps carrying a bit more of the load. And if so, I know you feel so bad. This pairing is so kind. No, you go first. No, you go first. You pick, you pick. Try to really allow yourselves to, yes, do that sometimes. It's so charitable of you. And I know after years you can get tired of it. So I love it. I don't want it to stop. But I also want you to be able to say, here's what I want and need sometimes. So love others as you love yourself. And that includes if you're in that position, whether male or female, working more at home or feeling like things are inequitable, speak up about it because it will attract and magnetize you to your partner more if they know that you're caring for yourself. Confidence is very attractive. So this pairing needs that reminder of confidence. Now, the type 3 and the type 9 together are very similar because they both run alongside. If you're an Enneagrammer, you know this, but the inner triangle of the Enneagram. So they can both hit anxiety levels, they can both hit productivity levels, they can both hit peace levels, and they can pull each other along in good ways and get each other revved up and stopped and in good moments. But when they're unhealthy, of course, that can get toxic too. And you can just say, let's just keep going. Let's just keep moving, or let's just sit down and have peace. Or you could take advantage of each other in it. So I want you to be careful. So remember the balance I said for everybody earlier, which is making sure that you get that spiritual, emotional, and physical self-care each day. So you're both awake, because these are two types that can fall asleep very quickly to their own needs. And then they can merge with somebody else and then not get their needs met. And then it can just be a disaster as they hide from each other. So make sure you keep showing up. You're worth it. Now, the 9 and 4 can really go deep because the 4 is there saying, let's make sure we pursue what is very authentic for you and really rally for the 9 and say, like, wow, I got an amazing person and I'm an idealist. So I'm going to think of your best traits a lot of the time. But oftentimes that 4 will want so much idealism that sometimes they still feel like the 9 is a bit too practical, or the 9 will feel like, I'm so glad I got a 4, but you are going so deep and I just want some more fun, some more grounded, pragmatic times. And so this pairing really does well when the 4 comes into their pragmatic, practical space and says, I'm so glad to have such a grounding spouse. And when the 9 says about the 4, I'm so glad to have somebody who brings me up toward the heavens because I'm very earthy and grounded. And so it is very similar in that way to the 1 with the 9. And I also see that sometimes show up in the 7 with the 9, where these idealists can really lift up the 9 and the 9 can really ground them. So I'm grateful if you're in that 4-9 space that you do that for each other. And that will require some deep breaths, of course, because it's hard also to be with people who are that different. Now, if you're with a 5-9 pairing or in it or have this relationship in your family, I want you to understand that the 5-9 together is so key with knowing that we can be chill, we can withdraw, we can relax, we're low drama a lot of the time. But I have seen drama rise up in this pairing when they have become too compliant, too complacent, too just assimilating into whatever happens and allowing themselves to just sort of pass through life without really engaging in it, because after the honeymoon, they can just stop making efforts. And so it's so critical and key that you still show up for you, that you remember whether you're that 5 lacking competency feelings and you need to be reminded that you're competent, or you're that 9 who doesn't want to rock the boat. Make sure you really do speak up for you and say what you like, what you need, and to do a bit of dreaming instead of just being practical or trying to like merge with each other, but to say, how can we rise up? What goals can we set? What can we do? And even merging together will be key too. And the 5 will be part of that as well, because they do like merging relationally, as the 9 does, in terms of just leaning in on what the partner wants. But the 5 is a relationalist. And so they will be looking for some of those cues in an introverted way. And the 9 will be looking for them in a practical way, at least. So there are some places where you guys will connect on this romantic level, but I want you to be intentional. That's my point. I don't want you to let it go. Calendar things so they happen. Now, the 9-6, I want you guys to know that, like I said, with the 3-9, you guys can do a lot of the similar movements. Anxiety, you can do courage really well together. You can do peace really well together. You can have diplomacy. You can achieve really well together. But one piece of advice for you is that I also see this pairing get into a very strong sloth mode together, just enjoying together and allowing for rest. And I want to remind you that because you're really good at lists, when you actually get moving, lists will be your friend. Prioritize lists where you each lay out the day and put your lists out and balance and allow for breaks. Or if you have to put all the work in the front, I recommend that to this pairing so that you guys can then achieve and all the good things you need to do before you come back to that Goldilocks zone I mentioned earlier of the rest and the play. And once you get to that point, you are golden. You're both practical, you're both grounded. And I love this pairing so much. You deserve the rest after all that hard work. Now, with the 7-9, there's a lot of light and joy to this because there's 2 positivity types together and there's a lot of fun to be had. And there's even some movement because the 7 gets the 9 moving in a very active way and they believe in them and they motivate them. And then 9 brings the 7 peace like they've never known before, which is such a joy to the 7 to be able to be invited into rest. But sometimes they can hold a space that forgets a little bit about the depths because they're very comfortable in these levels of practicality and dreams. And it's like, when I say the depths, I mean the emotional depths. And since neither one really wants to be reactive or deal with those deeper feelings, sometimes it can come out as anger from either one. And sometimes it can just be ignored altogether, and more sloth and indulgence and hedonism can be displayed. So it's important that you allow yourself some traction, some morality, and coming back to that, not just the emotional here, as I'm saying, is needed, but also to check in with your spiritual lives and calling and morality, as well as, which you'll probably do already, which would be a good deal of physical, a good deal of, as I'm reminding you here, just one-to-one time, but also these deeper spaces of spirituality and emotional processing are so good for you together. So you can use the paired app or one of the other apps out there if you want to. We had a 7-9 say that recently, so just keep that in mind. Now, as far as the 8-9, another really, really well-known pairing, this pairing often thrives and owns businesses together. This is just something I've noticed, or has that dream together. But one of my favorite things about the 9-8 pairing is also that there's a lot of power here. I already talked about the 9 being very powerful, but for those of you who know the 8 as a protector defender, this is another powerful type. And to see them paired up is just glorious. The things they can achieve. Oh, the places you'll go, you guys, in this 8-9 pairing, seriously. So make sure to do it well and to go places that you actually intend to go, that you guys cast the vision clearly and together. Because oftentimes the 9 will accommodate the 8. Oh, yeah, that sounds great. And then they will go to the place they don't want to go, or the 8 won't know that the 9 needs time to process. And so they'll hear the 9 say something and they thought the 9 was sincere, but the 9 was merging. So take your time, 8, slow down for your 9, and also listen really carefully, because I know that your 9 is listening to you. And for your 9, if you're not in a listening space, of course, readjust and awaken to that. But a really good practice for this pairing is a walk and talk. So key for them to get out there, both of them just digest some of the unhealthy or toxic anger that may be laying dormant, and this feeling of injustice that can sit for an 8-9 pairing, and really allow yourselves to step into the healing together and realize, oh gosh, we can be really judgy of each other. Let's try to relax. Let's try to get this walk and talk out and even do some of our narrative together. I know Dan Allender talked about that, and Becky on our podcast too, as a 9-8 pairing. Now, I could talk at length about each of these. That's why I have this all in my book. But last but not least is the 9 9. And this is a fairy tale pairing in some ways. But like all the pairings, it can have its problems. So we have a lot of peace here, a lot of fun, a lot of joy, a lot of positivity. But sometimes when we have all ups, we also have shadows, right? Because we're not dealing with the underbelly of things. And we tend to have both light and shadows in our world. So it's important that the nines in a relationship together still have a weekly coffee chat at least to say, let's look together at our finances, our communication patterns. Are we doing well? Do we need a date night? You can get my ENM planner if you'd like to off my website. You can print it out and it can be evergreen, so you can use it any time of the year. But I just want you to make sure you have some structure as a 9 9 pairing because, like the 3 9, like the 6 9, you guys can float away a little bit with that dreamy state of peace, or you could be in your anxious state or your achieving space and miss each other in that relational space. So keep on going and flying beautifully out there in your peacefulness and sharing it with the world, but stay activated and get those times together weekly where you look, how are we spiritually, physically, emotionally taking care of ourselves so that we can do our best for our people, our world, and not be forgotten together. So those are just a few tips for each of the pairings. You know where you can find more in my book. I am so glad you hung out with me for this mini episode on nines with every type. You are so special. If you are with a 9, I'm so glad for you. If you are a 9, also, you are incredible. And I am so glad that we have you in our world. I hope you keep growing, keep learning, keep staying awake, and keep resting too. Okay, I will talk to you soon. Bye bye.